The track is quiet at dawn, a silver ribbon of damp asphalt and tartans stretching into the soft, diffuse light. A single pair of spikes scuffs rhythmically, a metronome of breath and heartbeat woven together. In that hush, the world seems to hold its breath. And on that track, a young man learns the grammar of limits and the language of speed. Andreas Busse learned to run as if running could answer the question that woke him each night. What would it mean to be unbreakable? Not because he wanted to be famous or to collect medals, but because the cadence of his feet made the rest of life fall into focus. Every stride became a syllable in a sentence he didn't yet understand. Every lap a paragraph in a story still being written. Picture him then. Hair damp from early dew, socks stitched thin at the heels, eyes set with the stubborn calm of someone who knows that success is mostly invisible work. He stands at the curb of childhood and stares down two opposing roads, one paved with small comforts, slow progress, the safety of the expected, the other, a raw, demanding trail that rewards pain with clarity. He chooses the trail. It is not glamorous. It is just him and a stopwatch, a coach who believes in precision, and a growing conviction that the human body is a bell, waiting to be struck in exactly the right way. The bell rings not once, but 1,000 times. Interval repeats in the rain, long runs under orange street lamps, the aching silence of late-night recovery. It is in those repetitions that great athletes are born, not by miracles, but by unglamorous immersion. The story of Andreas Busse is a study in rhythm. He learned to glide through lactic pain with a kind of tender aggression, to accept the burn, and then, with almost tender irony, call it by another name: freedom. Freedom meant knowing that on an 800-meter race, 2 laps would contain an entire lifetime of decisions. When to resist, when to strike, when to trust the legs and let the heart do the navigating. In the crowd's roar, he found anonymity. In the loneliness of training, he found himself. The races were not just competitions. They were theaters where he tested metaphors against reality, where every tight curve and wind shift rewrote a scene. And when the whistle sounded and he pushed off, his body remembered decades of meticulous preparation. Past and present braided into one explosive moment, and time, that sly antagonist, folded neatly behind him. This is not merely the tale of records and medals, but of a man who practiced the art of return. Returning to focus after defeat, to humility after triumph, to the honesty of hard work when shortcuts beckoned. It is the story of nights turned to mornings in pursuit of a single perfect lap, of friendships forged in the shared ache of intervals, and of a resolve that was quiet but absolute. He would come to run against the best, to measure himself against history, and yet the secret seed of his greatness was something smaller: a daily, often private insistence to show up, to lace shoes, to feel the grit underfoot, to count breaths and to keep going. In that steady insistence the extraordinary grew. The crowd would clap, and the cameras would flash, but the most valuable victories were not always those that fit on a podium. They were the reclaimed mornings after injury, the regained stride after doubt, the simple truth of choosing the harder road day after day. Andreas kept answering, and in the echo of his footsteps we learn that greatness begins in the small, tireless acts of ordinary days. He was born into a landscape of plain streets and communal courtyards where children played until the streetlights came on and the air smelled of bread and coal. The house where he first learned to run had thin walls and an oven that taught him patience. His father worked early and returned late, hands calloused and voice soft, and his mother measured care in quiet deliveries: warm soup, repaired shirts, a reprimand that always made sense after coffee. They taught him about steadiness. But the family was rich in something rarer: expectations tempered by love, and a faith that small, honest effort was its own kind of dignity. School days were punctuated by cross-country runs and neighborhood races. His feet learned curves before he learned to read maps, and the thrum of community football and local meets gave shape to a boy's earliest dreams. At first, running was simple play. He raced friends down alleyways, feet slapping the cobbles, laughter spilling like loose coins into the air. Yet beneath this play, there was always a latent seriousness. Even as a child, he kept time in his head. He would sprint, then jog, then sprint again, as if practicing for a future that had not yet revealed itself. His earliest coach noticed. "He has rhythm," the coach said, eyes narrowed not out of judgment but recognition. Not many have that. Under instruction, the boy became a measured machine. Training became vocabulary. Fartleks and strides, tempos and recoveries. He learned to listen to his body the way someone learns to listen to another person. To hear its small protests and its brave agreements. The transition from talent to discipline is a narrow bridge and frightening in its exposure. There were trips to larger tracks, where lights burned bright and crowds wore unfamiliar faces. He tasted the bitterness of losing, the small, humiliating lessons that come from being outkicked in the final 50 meters. In the silence after a loss, he would write a private manifesto of sorts in his head. Tomorrow I will be less surprised by pain. Tomorrow I will be more cunning. The training changed. The distances sharpened into purpose. Middle distance, the 800 meters, became his canvas. 2 laps where the world compresses and the body is asked, more than anything, to be precise. There were injuries, as all true stories have. A tendon that flared like a red flag. A season lost to slow, methodical rehabilitation. In those months, he learned that identity could not be reduced to the size of a medal or the flash of a camera. He learned the less glamorous arts. Patience, careful eating, the discipline of sleep. He became an apprentice to his own body, learning its whispers and tending to them with a tender, almost scientific devotion. The rest of life did not stop. Friendships matured and he fell in love, not with the career but with a person who watched him run and understood the strange joy of someone who returns every morning to the same hard work. "You can't outrun fear," she told him once as they walked home through a rain-scented alley, umbrella forgotten. "But you can train it into something useful." He laughed and squeezed her hand. The laughter was humanizing, and the handhold became a touchstone during long therapeutics and lonely training camps. He rose then, in small increments and sudden surges. He learned to read races the way others read maps, sensing where to conceal speed and where to reveal it. Sometimes he waited patiently behind the pack, conserving energy like a chess player hiding a piece. Sometimes he exploded, cracking the field like thunder. Spectators learned his name and greeted it like an incantation, the syllables charged with history and hope. The microphone called him a contender. The media called him a promise. But for Andreas, the medal that mattered most was the one he had never yet won. The quiet confidence that he was a master of his craft, come what may. There were nights of doubt, of course, where even the most practiced stride felt brittle. He would lie awake on unfamiliar hotel sheets, stomach tight with the weight of expectation. He learned to turn that fear into ritual. Visualization became part of his warm-up. He would close his eyes and run the lap in miniature, feeling each muscle firing in sequence, imagining the final bend and that razor-edge sprint toward the line. He practiced breathing as if it were an instrument. Slow in through the nose, a steady metronome that calmed the body and sharpened the mind. When the gun fired, everything else dropped away. Time folded. The crowd's noise became a thin veil, and the race, a private conversation between his legs and his heart. Breakthroughs came like night skies suddenly filled with stars. There were seasons when everything aligned: training, rest, diet, mental focus. And his performances looked from the outside almost effortless. He shaved seconds where others couldn't find milliseconds. But between those luminous performances were decades of careful scaffolding, a nutrition plan that treated food as fuel, and restoration, a sleep schedule respected with near-religious fervor, and an openness to innovation in coaching that allowed small technical tweaks to yield big returns. Strength sessions became theater of iron will. Squat racks and deadlifts that taught him the geometry of power, plyometrics that taught him how to spring, and core work that made posture a partner rather than an afterthought. The races that became legend were never singular miracles. They were the visible summit of invisible mountains. In one memorable championship final, he felt an almost animal clarity. The first 200 meters were a blur of elbows and short, sharp breaths. For a moment, he considered biding his time, letting others set the tempo. But there are races where generosity is a trap. He found a seam, a narrow opportunity where the pack hesitated for the briefest of breaths, and he took it. The surge felt inevitable and intimate, as if the track itself assisted him. The final straight was a furnace of sound. The crowd roared in a way that felt like a physical force. He remembered his father's hands, rough and sure, and his mother's admonitions about doing things properly. He remembered cold mornings on the track, where he had practiced starts until his legs burned. He leaned, like someone returning a favor to every tiny act that had led him there, and crossed the line with his name newly carved into record books and a small private smile that tasted of relief and gratitude. Triumph, though, is complex. It gives and then asks for reinvestment. After medals came invitations, interviews, offers to travel and speak. The bright lights were intoxicating, but he remained tethered to the discipline that had made him. He took care to steward his influence as carefully as he tended his body, speaking to younger athletes about respect for the craft and the necessity of humility. Speed is a language, he told them in a low voice at a youth clinic, watching children attempt their first controlled laps. It tells you things about yourself if you listen. His training evolved with time. He learned from rivals, from advances in sports science, and from the steady march of experience. He incorporated cross-training, cycling for aerobic capacity, and pool sessions for joint-friendly strength. Recuperation became an art. Contrast baths that stung and soothed, massages that untied the knots of competition, and the precise timing of carbohydrate and protein intake to rebuild the weary muscles that carried him toward greatness. Yet for all the modern tools, his secret remained stubbornly ancient. Repetition. The same drills, the same focus, repeated until instinct and intention merged. There were low points that tempered the glory. Political tensions in the world he raced through shadowed some of the major meets. Travel was sometimes complicated, and the eyes of nations often pressed upon athletes in ways that were not always kind. Injuries resurfaced now and then, a reminder that the body keeps receipts. In those moments he learned to be both warrior and caretaker, to push, but not to destroy, to accept help without shame, and to measure progress in tiny recoveries rather than dramatic leaps. He became adept at the slow art of resurgence, each comeback an act of patience, each regained kilometer a small victory. In parallel with athletic life was a private life that warmed and steadied him. He found a partner who respected the demands of his calling and offered a quiet harbor. They shared simple domestic rituals, a coffee in the morning, an old record spinning on a Sunday, the comfort of a book read aloud in low light. Parenthood, if it came, added a new gravity to his days. The desire to model resilience and kindness reshaped his priorities, reminding him that the most important races are often those that never make the news. As retirement approached, he did not vanish. Instead, he transformed. Coaching became a new stage, a chance to translate the many small lessons he had buried into practical guidance for a new generation. He became a translator of experience, teaching young athletes how to temper raw talent with discipline, how to treat loss as a teacher, and how to root ambition in patience. He spoke candidly about mental health in sport, about the loneliness that can come at the top, and about the value of a life lived fully beyond the stopwatch. His approach was humane and exact. He taught athletes to love the repetition because that love was the only thing that could carry them through the inevitable lean seasons. Late in his life, when he visited tracks as a mentor and elder statesman, he moved with a different kind of speed. The speed of someone who had learned the value of pacing a whole life. He watched younger legs carve arcs he had once traced and smiled at their eagerness. The applause that followed them felt personal and universal at once, a communal recognition that effort is sacred and that the human form, when trained with gentleness and rigor, can astonish. The crowds cheered, medals gleamed, and records stood as markers. But the truest victory for Andreas Busse was quieter. It was in the knowledge that he had lived by choice and returned, again and again, to the simple act of showing up. He had learned to treat loss as a tutor and success as a responsibility. He had built a life in which excellence was not a destination, but a way of moving through the world. And so, when we stand at the track's edge and watch a new athlete explode from the block, we are seeing more than a race. We are seeing a lineage of courage and practice. We are seeing the echo of a young man who decided that 2 laps could carry meaning, who turned the ordinary into ritual, and the ritual into art. We see, in the flash of effort and the thunder of applause, the heart of what it means to be human. The stubborn, beautiful insistence to rise, to refine, and to keep running toward what matters. If you close your eyes, you can still hear the metronome of his footsteps. Steady, unrelenting, and full of grace. And in that sound, there is a lesson for all of us. The race is more than time. It is a testament. If you are willing to show up, day after day, you will find a readiness inside you that you didn't know was there. Embrace the quiet work. Love the early mornings. Keep your head low and your ambition honest. And when the gun fires, trust the miles you have earned. Thank you for watching Behind the Metal. If Andreas's journey moved you, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs inspiration and subscribe for more cinematic stories of dedication and heart. Join the community, leave a comment about which moment in the story inspired you most, and hit the bell so you don't miss future episodes. Keep running toward your goals. We'll see you at the next finish line.